Oh, we're back. We just can't get enough of you, everybody. We can't get enough of talking about this draft. There's the morning after, you know, picking up the pieces, Matt. And I hope that folks enjoy. We're going to try to do more impromptu. Not that this is so impromptu, because you can never talk enough about the draft. Let's start. You and I were having a conversation off the air that really inspired us to say we should just flow and share this stuff and get input from folks. I'm going to have the chat room open. Let's start with this choice about Josh Rosen, because there's these two camps now, and they both have reasonable positions. One is you basically just have to trade Josh Rosen for whatever you can get to whoever will take him, because it's time to turn the page, and you can't have two alpha quarterbacks in a locker room. The other is, well, you blew it, and let's make sure. Robert Klemko put out there today that Steve Keim didn't start making phone calls until right before the draft, only would settle for a first-round pick. By the time it was clear that that wasn't going to happen, the Giants take a quarterback, Washington takes a quarterback, and now the market's dried up. So you hurt your negotiating position. So do you keep Josh Rosen? If you do keep Josh Rosen, how do you go about it? What are the considerations for this big decision for the Cardinals, and one that's going to change another franchise eventually?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's one of those things that I don't think there's a specific right answer for this. So there are going to be a lot of people who think that there is only one right answer, and most people will think of it in the reactionary sense. The reactionary sense is what the media often reports, because their job is to be reactionary and to get the news as quickly as possible. And we got to remember that most of the people who are doing this writing, when they're thinking about doing maybe long form or investigative reporting, that's one thing. But even then, they sometimes have difficulty making that mental transition to how would people actually manage this situation. And I think when you take a look at this scenario, Josh Rosen, you got to look at Steve Keim. Start with Steve Keim. But Steve Keim knows that the best way to, I think, to basically handle this is that Steve Keim knows that if he starts to trade Josh Rosen during the draft, or tries to offer him during the draft, what most likely is going to happen is teams are going to try and lowball, because they're like, look, you're getting Kyler Murray. You got to dump this guy. You're in a panic. You want to try and get as much as you can out of this. So we're going to lowball you, and you're never going to get really what you think he was worth. So if Keim is approaching, other people might say, well, he only waited, as Klemko mentioned, that he waited until the day of the draft to make these calls. Well, that, on one end, you can look at this and say, well, wow, this guy's out of touch with reality, and he should have been trying to make plans much earlier. But it would have he probably looked at it and said, the end game of this is probably no good for me. So why even, I'm just going to stand by what I want, and we're going to make these trades later. It's going to be maybe not day 2, not day 3, might be month 2, month 3, August, maybe mid-season that we see a trade with Josh Rosen. And, if you do that, then what you have to do, though, is that you have to understand that you have to have a very specific plan for Josh Rosen, and you have to be very clear about how you approach that plan. And
go ahead.
I can go on with that. I mean, I think
well, we talked about this, right? Because I when we talked about it, it seems like one thing there is a right answer to, Matt, is the way you proceed if you keep Rosen and Murray, and it is to send a very equivocal message to Rosen and the whole team that Murray's the starter.
Yeah,
and you're building the offense around Murray, and Rosen's the backup, and Rosen has to learn this new offense, and that's his job now.
Yeah, and I think that's what you'd have to do. If you're Steve Keim, you get in there you talk with Cliff Kingsbury, and you say, listen, this is what our plan is. We're going to trade Josh Rosen hopefully by midseason. We know that the market dried up for him because what they want, everyone's going to be lowballing us. But at some point, some team's going to get desperate for a quarterback within the next 6 to 8 months, and they're going to feel like that even offering a little bit higher than what they've offered, right now, is worth it to them to get an experienced quarterback who still has upside. And if Josh has to come in and play, and he plays well in the offense, it's a little bit of an extended tryout as well for him. And it shows how good of a citizen he's been within our troops. So there's kind of proof in the pudding that he's been able to coexist with Kyler Murray and continue to work really hard. And that'll tell people that this is the type of guy we want to be a leader within our organization. And if Cliff Kingsbury, if you think he's capable of handling this, I'm skeptical. But
Right.
but if he's, because Cliff Kingsbury really hasn't been known as a quarterback guru, and he's also kind of an oddball choice to bring in here anyhow, even though it's the trendy it's the offensive scheme that's the trend. But over and over again, we've seen that the best coaches aren't always the hot new, I've got the new system type of thing. This is the same. This is the same thing we see in businesses over and over again, where somebody who's a proponent of a system and does it really well, um, that a higher up decides to hire them, and it doesn't make them a good manager, doesn't make them a good leader. It just means that they know a system. And so I'm a little worried about that with Kingsbury. But you'd have to be able to determine if you think Kingsbury can handle this appropriately, and you get in with him and tell him what your plan is. Then you get in there with Rosen and Kingsbury and say, listen, Josh, here's what's going on. It's not your fault. It's our fault. What we did, we drafted you. We didn't have the infrastructure around you to make you the quarterback that we know you're capable of being. And we don't know if we're going to be able to do that in the along the path in the timely manner that we need to get this all done. So, someday you're going to wind up a starter in this league. And I personally hope that, you take this and you work hard through this, and when we are able to trade you, that you can build a great career and make us rue the day that we traded you away. But in the meantime, you're going to have to be, you're not the starter. Kyler Murray's the starter. You're going to have to work in this, just like you said. But how likely is all this track going to really happen? Like, teams don't communicate this reasonably, as we've seen
Right.
now. So the fact of the matter is that there is a dearth of leadership when it comes to communication and how you transition in these types of ways, because everything is so abrupt, high pressure, that you don't get this long-term thinking. But if they were to do that, this was the way I think they'd go about it. And if you're only looking at 6 to 8 months, it's not that big of a deal. This they can probably handle if they do it this way. But the issue that that people are concerned about as well, you're losing out on trying to get a player now, or get picks now. But the thing is that next year's draft can be really good, and you can probably get a pick next year. And if you stay patient with what's going on, quarterbacks get hurt. They need to bring in, let's bring in somebody new that we might be able to get here. What if there's a guy with diminishing skills? What if Ben Roethlisberger's skills start to diminish beyond a point of no return, and it becomes very notable, and Josh Dobbs isn't the answer, and Mason Rudolph isn't the answer? Now
Omar Jacobs.
Yeah, Omar, exactly. So you bring, you look into those situations and you realize that that's happening. What if Phillip Rivers? Same thing with Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady. I mean, there's a number of guys who, we already talked about Tom Brady's waning, accuracy in the vertical game. And you could see how a team decides, what, we've assessed this now. Doesn't look as good as we thought he would in camp. He's not really, we're a little concerned about this. Let's bring somebody in. I mean, it's the same thing with like Peyton Manning with the neck surgery, and before he needed the neck surgery in Indianapolis, the Colts brought in Nate Davis, who was not a high round pick, but they just thought he's a guy that we had a high grade for, and we'll give him a chance to audition here. And Nate Davis didn't really handle it well. But the thing is that teams tend to, when they have a franchise guy they've leaned on for this many years, they tend to be a little slow on trying to address that until it's absolutely too late. So this Rosen thing is fascinating, and it's just going to be a type of thing where I think Keim just looked ahead and said, I'm not going to get what I want for him, and I know he's worth more than this. And the media view is going to be dim because they're reactionary and they don't understand football to the degree that maybe we do, in terms of how to evaluate a quarterback on tape, because they're going to look at him. And we even have analysts in our community who are like, Josh Rosen is trash, he's done, I don't think he's any good, this is bad. And they're the same people who are writing off Jared Goff. They're the same people who probably, they're just 1 year to the next. And I think that, if he believes in that longer term view, he's going to be the type of guy that's going to say, I'm not going to take anything less than a first round pick or second round pick. He was probably getting third and fourth round offers, and that's why he probably didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that it. Look, I think that Keim. I think that maybe Roger Goodell and the ABC thing might have interfered with this, because the reality is that if they really were on the fence until this week, then that's not good. Okay, that's a sign of some structural instability in the Cardinals organization, right? I mean, would you agree, Matt, that if you have the number one pick, then probably by like mid March, you should have a good idea who you're taking.
Yeah. And
So
And I think they should have, and I do think the TV thing might have interfered with it, because if they don't want you to tell what you're doing, who you're picking until then how do you what are you going to do? Are you going to say you had a deal negotiated in principle with another
right,
team, and you're just going to wait like 2 months, or you're going to wait a week, or I don't know,
it's a bad
maybe that did
spot.
get in the way.
And because I mean, the by the book way to do this, Matt, right, is you decide you're taking Kyler Murray, probably basically when you hire Cliff Kingsbury, and kudos to all the people who just took this at face value when Kingsbury was hired and said, Kingsbury says he loves Kyler Murray. You can read the Josh Weinfuss story; it's good. This goes back years. The Kingsbury Kyler thing. They have a close relationship. They know each other well and have a lot of affection, both in personal and a football way. So to immediately key in on this and say, well, so they drafted Rosen. Kingsbury's the coach, and he loves Murray. Murray is his guy. Then at that point, you start laying the groundwork for a trade of Rosen away, for Rosen's sake. Also, because if you imagine how differently we're talking about this, Matt, if Rosen was traded before free agency to somebody for even for an early second and a conditional pick or something like that. And Rosen now has already gotten maybe the first voluntary workouts. He got introduced by his new organization. Now it makes more sense, because by starting to negotiate right before the draft, you've lost all your leverage. This is like the Antonio Brown situation where when the Steelers come out and say, we're definitely trading him. Great. You lost all of your leverage now. So I want to go back to one thing you said that I think is important. And for me, if I was making this call, would rule over this. Cliff Kingsbury may be a bit of a reach as a head coach. What you hired Cliff Kingsbury to do was revitalize this offense. And you gave him the ultimate chip to do that with Kyler Murray. Why not let him concentrate on that job? Because you're right, and as we talked about this, there is a way to navigate this so that maybe I don't think you're ever going to get a first round pick for Josh Rosen. I mean, maybe if Kyler Murray gets hurt and Rosen lights the league on fire, then you can get a first round pick for him. But I mean, that's betting on a lot to happen. But like we said, maybe you put a expiration date on it. You don't let this go on forever, maybe for a year. You see if you can rehabilitate some of his value, and you keep the locker room intact by making sure they know who the true alpha is and that Rosen's the backup now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot to put on the plate of a first-time NFL head coach who
I
also,
mean,
go ahead.
it can be, but at the same time, these are guys that had major college, he coached major college football. He had
Yeah.
multiple good quarterbacks in his stable before. And there is an understanding that as long as you make it clear who the starter is and you give the other guy time to get over it, then you deal. And most guys are reasonable. I mean, we talked about this earlier. It's like, listen, you've had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. You've had Drew Bledsoe and Tom Brady. You've had Steve Young and Joe Montana. The list goes on where we've had players who sat behind, stars who ended up being stars themselves. It's just a matter of whether your leadership is good enough about defining who is the guy, and you don't make it a wishy-washy thing. Even Bill Walsh talked about one of the mistakes that was made was that people criticized Bill Walsh about was that when he started to get a little wishy-washy about Montana and Young and how he started to handle that. And at some point they had to make a decision and they got rid of Montana. But it was one of those deals that's where it became uncomfortable for the team and it was affecting the team. But I think the Cardinals have such a long way to go that it makes sense in one respect to say, listen, we screwed up with our plan with Rosen last year. We want to go a different direction. We like how these high scoring offenses are going. We want that. So if you're thinking about your overall plan's more important than a player. So if your overall plan is you want to be on the cutting edge of what NFL offenses are doing and adopt a lot of what these college offenses are then you have to be basically you have to be good enough or courageous enough to scrap the plan that you had the year before, even if you made a huge investment on it. Sometimes the best moves are to acknowledge that you messed up, even on a big scale, and start now rather than prolong it. And I think that they looked at this and decided, if we're going to adapt Cliff Kingsbury, we need to let him pick the guy he wants, and we'll go this route with him. And that means that Josh Rosen is no longer, viable for what we really want, even though he's a good prospect. And I think that there will be a team or two that looks at this and decides, you know what, we can get now the thing with Rosen, though, is you look at his contract and he's got 2 years left on his contract, basically, heading into this year. So, he's a free agent in 2021. So they don't want to wait too long in terms of
Right.
getting him. But it's a situation where some teams are going to come to their senses. I mean, we'll probably be talking about this in a minute, but I read that that the Giants basically spent $20 million more on getting Daniel Jones than they would have if they got Josh Rosen.
Yeah, this is one of those things where if Washington had traded up ahead of the Giants to get Daniel Jones, then maybe the Giants fans would be just celebrating right now instead of feeling the way they are feeling. And of course, if folks who didn't see Dave Gettleman's comments after the draft last night, he said he didn't watch him last year during the season and fell in love with him after 3 series at the Senior Bowl.
That's just insane, because that's just insane. I mean, I hate that I'm like saying this, but it's just true. If you watched Daniel Jones at the Senior Bowl and you were impressed with him, you are not you don't know football,
Yeah.
and you don't understand the position, you don't understand what you're looking at, because he was among the worst. He was among the worst quarterbacks in performance in drills at the Senior Bowl when you're talking about 7-on-7 and 11-on-11. He was not accurate at a lot of times. He might have seen 3 plays that you could have looked at and said, that's the type of quarterback I'm looking for. And then you would have had to ignore the interceptions and the throws that you're looking at and going, how are you unable to make those types of throws against air? How are you unable to do that? And to me, that's the craziness of this situation, is that I really think he's unhinged in terms of the decision that he made here. This is not a good decision.
Yeah, even if it's coming up with something after the fact to try to make it sound good, it's a terrible thing. It doesn't make sense. So, one of the things we learned from the draft last night is that sometimes it is as bad. I'm thinking of like Evan Silva and the Cocoon and things like that. Like sometimes it really is as bad as your least charitable, or worse than your least charitable attributions of how these teams make decisions. And I think Matt, we both heard stories behind the scenes that we can't repeat about. Yeah, sometimes teams are petty or very ill-advised or ill-informed. And unfortunately, I think for Giants fans, that was put on full display. And maybe there was a team other even than Washington. And look, if Washington loved Daniel Jones, that doesn't make me feel better about it. If considering that what we know about Washington's organization, but that was something interesting to learn last night. So very stimulating stuff. I want to turn the page back to something that happened right before the draft. And first and foremost, and I apologize to anybody, our Twitter following is always very gracious and good. And I know that there have been some times that I've tweeted about this Tyreek Hill situation and looking at it strictly to football lens, and it's terrible. It's gut wrenching. I mean, maybe I haven't tried to touch the child abuse from the child's point of view in this situation, because I don't even know. It just leaves me speechless. So I want to make sure to say first and foremost that this is a tragedy going on for this child, and that is the story, the real story. But we talk about football, and we talk about football implications of things. And because this has been on our radar for a while, it's not too early, I don't think, to talk about this, because this is something that's been known to us for weeks, if not months now. How important is Tyreek Hill? And look, they can go get. I mean, Tyreek Hill was a 4th or 5th round pick partially because of these issues, but I don't know he would have. I mean, Mecole Hardman might replace some of what Andy Isabella might be able to replace. I mean, there are some players still left that the Chiefs can take to replace some of this. It sure seems to me like we have to be giving a pretty large possibility to not seeing Tyreek Hill play football again. So for your guy Patrick Mahomes, how important was Hill to the success of this offense?
Oh, well, I mean, certainly he was important. There's no doubt about that because he does create the run pass conundrum that exists in terms of the way that they shift, also what he can do after the catch, as well as what he can do to get behind the defense. So you get a player who's capable of three very important things, and that puts a defense on notice. Now, for people to say that Tyreek Hill was the offense, and that's the reason that Patrick Mahomes was great, I would say that's a little over the top. I would say that it's more that Patrick Mahomes might have been a 40 touchdown or a 35 touchdown thrower last year without Tyreek Hill. Um, in terms of how if Tyreek Hill weren't on the field, I would probably be a little nauseous if the Chiefs think that they can replace Tyreek Hill with Mecole Hardman or Andy Isabella. And I would rather see them get a bigger receiver who's fast. I'd rather see them get a more complete player who actually can handle physical play, and be a little bit more creative in tight space and with physicality. Um, I'd rather see them do that than get guys who I think are basically going to be gadgetized versions of Tyreek Hill. So if you're gonna go get like a discount gadget, or you're gonna get a complete receiver who's just not as athletic as Tyreek Hill, I'd rather go for the complete receiver, because I think one thing that Mahomes, the one guy that Mahomes had who also was just as important as Tyreek Hill, if not more important, was Travis Kelce.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at what Travis Kelce does well, Mahomes can throw the ball up for grabs and let Kelce win it. And Kelce got to do that for the first time in his NFL career because the accountant Alex Smith was gone. So when you look at it from that standpoint, I think that Tyreek Hill was able to win some passes like that, but it was oftentimes when you watch those targets, they were more by accident. They were more off-targeted balls that Hill had to go back and win. Whereas with Kelce, they were more conscious, like, I'm putting this here and I'm going to make you win it. And I think that the Chiefs would do better if they had receivers who can do a little bit of both. And there are some receivers in this class who are capable of that. So I hope they don't say we need another Tyreek Hill, because they're not going to find one. There's
Right.
not another Tyreek Hill in this class. And if you try to get it, it's going to be a pale imitation. So yeah, that's where I'm at with this.
What do you think of Demarcus Robinson? Because he would be the next man up. I mean, they could go to free agency. I mean, there's still guys like Michael Crabtree and some out there, but Demarcus Robinson with Chris Conley now with the Jags, recruited by Nick Foles. Nick Foles building the Jags wide receiver core. Demarcus Robinson is a player that, like Tyreek Hill, dropped in the draft somewhat due to character concerns. Going back to when we were evaluating Demarcus Robinson in his rookie class, Matt, I think we would have put him among the top ceiling players. Fair?
I think so. I mean, he's certainly good after the catch, and he's certainly someone who can win the ball in the air. He's not consistent, and I think that that's going to be the issue here. Is that he had a really nice summer, and so I kind of envision it as that if he doesn't absolutely just ball out this year, he's going to have his best year this year, I think, because by necessity, and then they can probably move on from him and command some value out of him, or he'll just get a better contract and somebody's going to overpay for him. But I think that he's capable. I think Mahomes is capable of elevating Robinson's play. And we'll put it at that. And I think Robinson will get a chance to prove that he's a worthwhile contributor in an offense who can give you some high-end upside, even though he's not quite Hill. So, the big issue for them is, can they get Sammy Watkins to stay healthy? Can they, and pair with Kelce? If they do, then Robinson's going to have a good year. If Watkins can't stay healthy, and now it's down to basically Kelce and Robinson, and they don't have much else, They either need Byron Pringle to step up, who's a very good route runner.
Yes.
And if he can work on, if his hands develop, and he's worked on his hands a little bit more in terms of the way he catches the ball, Byron Pringle could be a really surprisingly good player. And you might just not, you may see a drop off. I mean, this, Patrick Mahomes at 50 touchdowns, even with Tyreek Hill, I'd go probably not this year again. But, could Patrick Mahomes throw 30 to 40 touchdowns this year, even without Tyreek Hill and what they have existing? Yeah, I think that's possible. And I think they're going to add a receiver in this draft class. I just hope it's a more complete player because they're not going to find Tyreek Hill.
By the way, Ian Rappaport saying, if the Cardinals go corner at 33, and by the way, what happened to all that talk about Patrick Peterson wanting to be traded? I don't know if that's going to come up, but so still many, and Jadeveon Clowney is potentially on the market. So still wheels that could be turning. Ian Rappaport saying the Bills should be able to get, the Colts should be able to get a ton for number 34 with players, offensive linemen like Cody Ford, Greg Little still on the board. So putting a little hint out there for what we should look for at the top of the board tonight. So if you're thinking Kyler Murray to DK Metcalf, maybe not. Maybe it's put Greedy Williams and Patrick Peterson across from each other on the Arizona defense. That's a good start with those LSU corners. I'm glad you mentioned Byron Pringle. Another guy to remember, too, because I know that the Cowboys could use some help at wide receiver, Cedric Wilson. Some of these guys who went on IR for these teams. Did you like Cedric Wilson last year?
Did I like Cedric Wilson?
Yeah.
I didn't.
I think of those two, Pringle and Wilson, as having similar strengths.
Yeah, I don't really have much of an opinion on Wilson. I haven't seen enough of him to really feel like I can form a great opinion on him. But with Pringle, I saw some promise enough that I still think, especially not only at Kansas State, but also in the preseason before he got dinged up a little bit. So I'm a little more excited about Pringle.
And they have give Garrett Dieter too, right? A good possession receiver.
Yeah, and certainly with Dieter and Kemp's kind of just a possession guy for sure, but Dieter gives you a little more possession plus ability to stretch the intermediate and vertical areas of the field in the way that Kemp can't. And they're also, I think they were roommates, Mahomes and Dieter for a little bit during that time. So we'll see. I mean, I think that what happened is they made a big splash with Sammy Watkins last year. You already have Kelsey and Hill. So when it kind of sublimates the rest of the town on this depth chart that, those three guys are going to be the priority. And Robinson had a good camp last year. So maybe Robinson can build on it this year and see that this is his true opportunity. And if it is, then, you might see the best season yet out of Demarcus Robinson. I'm just waiting to see, now that we saw what Hill had to say in the media after he was quote unquote cleared, whether the Chiefs decide, wow, we better move on fast. Like we better be ready because he's not going to be here.
Yeah, I think that at this point, people aren't going to let this go, and the vividness of the conversation was just really. It's just something that if they were ready to say we're moving on from Kareem Hunt, it seems like the same logic should apply to Hill. But we all know that unseen variable is how much they contribute to the team. So we'll revisit this, I'm sure. And don't forget, Matt, Sammy Coates is on the roster. Come on, man, Sammy Coates.
Wait a minute,
that's your guy.
Oh,
that's your guy.
Wait a minute, isn't Benjamin on the roster too?
Benjamin they brought in last year, but I believe he's not. He's still a free agent.
Okay.
And they want speed. They have Grayson, the speedster, the track guy.
I like Devin Grayson.
Yeah,
I actually like Devin Grayson. He's an interesting guy, but
maybe the answer's already there.
Yeah, maybe.
So you're working on the post-draft RSP, and I'm going to be doing the post-draft Bloom 100, et cetera. So as you were sitting down this morning and we had a chance to sleep and let things settle in our brain, what bubbles to the top of your brain now that we've had a chance to sleep on it?
That the Patriots need to draft even another receiver after N'Keal Harry, because, you look at the contracts, Julian Edelman's contract's up at the end of the year. Same with Demaryius Thomas, Philip Dorsett, Maurice Harris, Bruce Ellington, Matt Slater, Josh Gordon, who signed an extra year, but we don't even know what's going to happen there. I mean, but basically you're looking at N'Keal Harry as the one long-term guy on this roster, and the rest are basically we're either going to re-sign one of them or let them go. And all those guys that I mentioned are pretty much at a point in their career that I don't think the Patriots are going to invest in them again. So I would not be surprised if they double dip here and get, and go for another talent at this position, because I think they need it. That's one that comes to mind right away. TJ Hawkinson, I like the pick. I think that it's, when you have a tight end who can block at the level that you're asking, you know, I know the argument is, oh, well, are you really going to pay that money for a sixth lineman? Yes, I get that. I understand that. But you also think, well, I would if I could pay for six linemen who makes it easy enough so that the other linemen can get downhill and do their job and make the running game more efficient. And that puts defenses on enough notice that they can't cheat against the pass, so that when you do play action, guess who's going to get wide open? Well, that sixth offensive lineman who can catch the ball and break tackles and make big plays for you. So I really like this. I think that it gives, the one thing I've always noticed with Matthew Stafford is that over the years, as much as he deserves responsibility for some of the plays that he's made, he's also in equal part. There are times that I've watched him go, wow, this team should have been 10-6 or 11-5.
Unforced
But
errors.
of unforced errors, and he made the throws. The throws were there, and I think the difference oftentimes were the difference between Matthew Stafford being a 6-8, or 6-10 team and a 10-6 team was how many times their receivers dropped passes and didn't sustain drives, and just the lack of execution where Stafford executed, but his receivers didn't. And often it was his tight ends who could not execute.
Eric Ebron, for instance.
Even Pettigrew, before that, so Pettigrew and Ebron, big deal. And especially when that part of the passing game also helps the running game. When you have a good tight end who can catch in the middle of the field, and you can kind of play games with those linebackers and safeties. And I think that Hawkinson is absolutely going to do that. The Dwayne Haskins pick, I was pleasantly surprised that Washington picked Dwayne Haskins. And I really think if this offensive line can hold up, Haskins is going to be a fun player to watch in this offense. It's just my biggest fear is this offensive line healthy enough, or is it kind of more like one of those airplanes that you fly in and you see duct tape being like up on the inside of the cabin and everything's kind of rickety and you're kind of nervous about the whole thing falling apart? I'm a little bit on that end of Washington's offensive line. It's good enough when they're healthy, but can they stay that way? But the weapons are nice right now, and I think that they'll be, if they can add to those weapons during this draft and next year, that this team could transition nicely into a Dwayne Haskins era.
Yeah, I think that transition is the key there for Haskins, because when I think of Jay Gruden and what he's done with his quarterbacks, going back to Andy Dalton, mobility is important. That's not something you're going to get from Haskins. The integrity of the offensive line is going to be important. They've had a lot of injuries, so that's just something that's Haskins needs to succeed. And well, they have Paul Richardson, which is good, and they need to get some more weapons for him.
Yeah.
And we'll see about how rational the team is in building around Haskins, because talking about the Murray versus Rosen thing, you build to the strengths of your quarterback, and hopefully, and this is what's going to be somewhat of not as much of a challenge, but maybe a fun artistic task for Cliff Kingsbury. But it's you have to evaluate your quarterback and understand and commit. On Hawkinson, there's Mr. Cecil Lammy.
Good morning,
Cecil. Oh, I cannot hear you.
I think there's been
There's too much.
Yeah, I know.
There's too much in Nashville. Did you see the picture, Matt, of the street in Nashville? The flooding of people, like that drafted.
It was pretty insane,
including two of our own. I cannot hear Cecil.
Yeah,
we'll wait for Cecil to come in, and we will be very excited.
There it
now
is.
we can hear you. There we go.
Oh, okay, I
All
figured
right.
it out.
I will take you I will hand the baton to you, Cecil, in
Okay.
Nashville. Noah,
Yeah.
go, run.
Yeah, Noah fan. First, I wanted to give you guys a view of my apartment. I rented an apartment here in Nashville. So I've got beautiful skyline behind me.
Oh,
Hopefully it won't
nice.
be like rainy and soggy today as it was last night on Radio Row. But Noah Fant with the Denver Broncos. I know a lot of Broncos fans are kind of pissed off about it because they wanted Devin Bush, which, by the way, Bloom.
Yes.
Oh. Anyway, when you look at Noah Fant, this was for Joe Flacco. This pick was specifically for Joe Flacco. This was to allow him to have that weapon that they don't have. Listen, there's been a fantasy for a long time in Denver about Jeff Hireman being anything. That's always been false. Guy can't stay healthy. Guy's not very good when he is healthy. Didn't do much in college and has done barely anything as a pro. Jake Butt, a fine prospect in his own right, but with 3 knee injuries now, you can never expect him to be healthy. I know Butt gets angry when you say that. He's actually mad at me, but it's like I'm just telling you the truth. Like,
These are the facts.
right. We hope he does stay healthy. And Troy Fumagalli, when I saw him at rookie minicamp or excuse me, voluntary mandatory minicamp a couple weeks ago, like he's really small, like really small. So Fant's an exciting prospect, certainly with that speed to attack the seam. And certainly what 1 out of every 4.1 catches of his went for a touchdown.
Right.
So yeah, there's a red zone threat. Cortland Sutton is the number 1. I think everyone needs to understand that Sutton is the 1 for the Broncos. Sanders would be the 2, and then Fant down the middle, and especially there for Joe Flacco. And when John Elway was asked last night in his press conference after the first round, were you considering a quarterback? He's like, no.
Ha.
So there you go. Take that, everybody.
Any chance at all that they would trade for Rosen? Any chance at all, Cecil?
No, they didn't like him at 10 last year. So, why would they take him at 10 this year? There's a chance they take Will Grier if he's there at 41, maybe even at 52 now with those 2 second-round picks. But really, with you look at the Broncos, look for Deebo Samuel today. Some people have mocked DK Metcalf. I don't see that. They really like Deebo Samuel, though. So make sure to keep an eye on that as the Sanders situation is a little touchy right now, honestly.
I think that would be a great pickup for them to have Samuel because, you get a lot of upside with both Sutton and Fant, but you also have a little bit of downside with both of those guys in terms of how they catch the football and their completeness right now as players as they're, developing. They're still developing as players. And I think that when you get a guy like Samuel who can do a little bit of everything, Flacco needs some guys like that. Otherwise, the offense becomes a little bit more predictable in terms of what personnel can and can't do. And I think that having a guy who can kind of tie that offense together like Samuel would be really helpful.
Yeah, so keep an eye on that and keep an eye on a quarterback, whether it's Will Grier or some would say Drew Lock, but Will Grier is actually a preference of Rich Scangarello because he coached him at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, the Senior Bowl. Cease, did you see that Dave Gettleman said he fell in love with Daniel Jones after 3 series at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, and here's the thing about that, and well, we all were there this year. Listen, Daniel Jones was awful during the week of practice, like just god awful. Just didn't look like a first rounder at all. And then he was the MVP of the game. That reminds me of someone we saw years ago, Bloom. His name was Pat White.
Yeah.
Pat White didn't
pick.
go number 6 though.
No. And I think that the Senior Bowl MVP or something like that, was it Kyle Lauletta and Davis Webb? Were they all Senior Bowl MVPs? There was something tweeted out last night that the Giants have taken 3 straight, something with the Senior Bowl quarterbacks. So maybe there's a bad pattern there. Go ahead.
Did a scout? I'm just wondering if a scout actually, kind of fed the laptop feed of Gettleman with Pornhub as opposed to the real tape, and had Daniel Jones kind of listed at the bottom there, because that's the only explanation I can think of as why he would pick somebody that high.
That's good. Now, absolutely insane pick. What was the New York Post, fellas? That was like the Blues Clueless. Is that right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. I made reference that some might be too young to get, and unless you were young when it was on. See, but just to keep it on Denver real quick, while I've got you in interview mode, I get to interview you. What's going on with this Chris Harris thing, man? Are they going to come to their senses?
I think cooler heads will prevail, but I think Chris Harris needs to stay the hell off of social media. Like he's not doing himself any favors with this whole this is my mood and all that. Like I get it, I understand, and everyone's free to express themselves in all sorts of ways. But if you're the Broncos, you look at this situation and you're like, okay, oh sorry, had an alarm set. Never know how late the nights are going to get here in Nashville. So anyway, with
Vegas.
right with Trashville. Uh, with Chris Harris Jr., I think cooler heads do prevail. But I know that now it's gotten personal. But the Broncos have all the leverage because he's under contract. So I hope Chris Harris gets his contract. I hope he stays in Denver, and I think that will happen. I think it was good for him last night that one cornerback went. I think that was good news for him to show, like, hey, you can't just draft someone and replace me. So we'll see what happens. But I think things will turn out better than they seem right now.
Give us a feel of what we might not be privy to, or what might surprise us since you were there on Radio Row. Like anything you were hearing, or reactions, or tidbits, or anything that was dropped that maybe as we were publicly consuming the draft that wouldn't have been in view.
Yeah, the stuff that wouldn't have been in view is that the Raiders wanted to make a move. And I think everyone probably already heard this anyway, so I don't know how behind the scenes it is. But the Raiders really wanted to make more of a splash than Clelin Ferrell at number 4 overall. So that didn't happen, obviously. Some other things that were rumored mainly have to do around the quarterbacks, but really that was about it. Honestly, people trying to move around for quarterbacks. Miami tried to, thinking about moving back, although Christian Wilkins is the type of guy that can help change a culture there. The culture at Miami is one where they have dance competitions during practice and they don't really concentrate on playing football. Wilkins is the type of guy that can kind of change that. So I thought that was a good pick when they stayed put and weren't able to trade back. And also on Chris Harris, by the way, and John Elway said this last night, like they got a couple calls, but there really wasn't a lot of action. So in football and in life, don't overvalue who you are and what you can bring to the table. Chris Harris Jr. has a lot of value, but obviously not enough to make teams clamor and be like, here's a first rounder, here's a premium second rounder. That's all I've got for last night.
Cecil, if just outside of divorcing yourself from being someone who covers the Broncos in terms of like what you're hearing, just in a perfect world, what would you like to see the Broncos do?
Offensive line. Dalton Reisner. I would like to see him take Dalton Reisner in the second round and kind of shore up that offensive line, give him an option in case Garrett Bowles doesn't work out. You could move Juwan James to the left side, and you could put Dalton Reisner on the right side. I think he's a tackle. I know a lot of people have him listed as guard, but he can do both. So fix up that offensive line, continue to add playmakers to the offense. That's where Deebo Samuel comes back into the conversation, and also draft another running back. People may not think, well, what do they got? They got Phillip Lindsay, they got Royce Freeman. Phillip Lindsay won't be able to practice until August, and it might be mid-August by the time he's out there. And then, what's he do at 100%? How much is Royce Freeman going to be involved? And Devontae Booker's the third back. Kalfani Muhammad, by the way, is still on the roster, which is interesting. But anyway, you need another running back. So the Broncos need to continue to add playmakers. Their defense is close as long as they keep Chris Harris Jr., add to that offensive line, and add playmakers on offense.
So, Cecil, how do you feel about Devin Bush and Nick Chubb exchanging helmet tattoos for the next 5 years?
The Bush pick is awesome because and listen, Devin White, fantastic as well, and he loves horses and all that. But you could easily make the argument that Devin Bush is more pro-ready than Devin White because of the instincts. The fact that we've all seen Devin White overrun plays. He's incredibly athletic, but he doesn't know quite what he's doing yet. He doesn't quite know how to diagnose. Devin Bush does know that. Reminds me a lot of London Fletcher. And the Steelers know linebacker talent. And, this is a great move. Didn't give up that much, honestly. Didn't give up that much to go get 10 spots to get their guy. So I think it's a great move for the Steelers.
Yes, he reminded me of the Troy Polamalu move. And it's the only other time the Steelers have made a big move up the board. And I remember watching the Steelers lose. It was the loss to the Titans, right, that preceded that move up. And it was a Tommy Maddox Steelers team. And it was just clear that they needed a difference maker, a tone setter in the secondary, and they went and got Troy Polamalu. And it was just so clear that they needed to fill that hole left by the loss of Ryan Shazier, and everything you're hearing about Bush as far as being a glass eater, a guy who holds, just like you talked about with Wilkins, holding other teammates accountable, a culture setter. It's great. It's great. You should, unless you're a Giants fan, I guess. And I think even the Raiders have a plan. It's an internally consistent plan. We'll see where it goes, but they got players. So many things from last night still like swirling around. We were talking right before you popped on, Cease, about some fantasy implications, and I want to ask you, because I could go along with what you were saying, Matt, that TJ Hawkinson is going to be a very reliable receiver. I mean, pure fantasy wattage, I'm afraid that they're going to maroon him near the line of scrimmage as a blocker more than we would want because of how dead set they are on the run. And congratulations, CJ Anderson, for that destination, because he'll get some run there. That Hawkinson's going to just make it a more reliable offense. But what do you think about the stance that you don't take a tight end in the top 10, that's too high? That position just doesn't influence the game enough.
No, it's BS. That's the old way of thinking. Like, people say it's a reaction or an overreaction to what's going on in the NFL. But if you're a good team, you have to recognize that the middle of the field is where this game lives now. That's why, guys, you remember, and I know you guys will remember, but to remind the audience, what was it, like 3-4 years ago, safeties weren't getting paid?
Right.
And inside linebackers, oh, what do you need that for? You're focused on the outside, the perimeter. Now it's the middle of the field. Why? Because of spacing concepts in the NFL. They're going to spread you out. They're going to attack the seam. And that's why you see this shift. And when you have a class like this, actually a little bit surprised Irv Smith didn't go in the first round, but when you have a class like this, now you can adjust things. And I know Fant went at 20. He didn't go inside the top 10, but the old ways of like only Eric Ebron or Vernon Davis and Kellen Winslow Jr. have been taken in the top 10. It was horrible. None of those guys really worked out or whatever for their original teams. Ebron obviously was very good last year. I think that's just an old way. It's people haven't caught up to things yet and are still stuck in like looking at history and looking at the numbers, which you can learn a lot from both of those. But it's just an old mindset that I think is changing because of the way the game is changing, like it or not.
So go ahead, Matt.
And I think that when you talk about the guys that didn't work out, who'd you mention? You mentioned Winslow,
Eric Ebron, and Vernon Davis.
Okay. So, Vernon Davis, I would look at this and say, if you really analyze it, Vernon Davis worked out. He just didn't work out because he didn't have the coaching staff to want to exploit him the way that they should have. And then Kellen Winslow, he made a dumb mistake, and it was basically 5 minutes. A 5 minute stupid decision in his life in a shopping mall basically cost him his career, in terms of what it could have been. And then Ebron was, arguably just a player that maybe was misdrafted, and shouldn't have been picked that high. But you're going to look at those three cases as citing it. You don't have enough of a sample size anyway, really to look at there. So I agree with you.
Well, it's like the people that say take your quarterback in the mid rounds because look at Nick Foles and Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. You're just asking for misevaluations. That's all you're doing. You're not actually saying that's the better part of the draft to take quarterbacks in. Also, people get this mindset like every draft's the same. I absolutely cannot stand it. I fight it locally on the airwaves. I'll fight it here on this show as well. We're smart about the way we talk about football, but the people that just assume every draft's the same. Well, you can't take a tight end in the top 10 because that doesn't make sense. And this and quarterbacks. Look at the mid rounds. Every draft is different. The talent is different. The structure is different. The flow is different. So you have to recognize what's going on currently, and that current trend is tight end.
Okay, so these fantasy knee-jerk reactions. And Matt, when I had more time to think on it and write the piece that went out to the Football Guys mailing list, I think Hollywood Brown's a winner. And I know people are going to look at what happened to John Brown last year. I know that people are going to look at Lamar Jackson. We talked about this on the show last night, Matt, that Lamar Jackson can grow. But the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. Did your needle change at all? And then Cease, what for fantasy and just for the trajectory of the Ravens, Hollywood Brown, the Raven?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think the needle changed much for me, and it was still pointing in a positive direction. I just think that people have a difficult time projecting what's going to happen. That's just generally how it is. That's why they subscribe to fantasy sites, because they want to see, they either A, want someone that's going to help them project what's going to happen, or B, they basically are entertained by what we have to say and think and want to show how they did it better. But I think for the most part, it really is that most people follow the crowd. They tend to be a little bit more sheep-like when it comes to looking at things, and they need to see they need to see enough evidence that any fool would look at that player and say that's what's going to happen before they decide to make the turn and say, oh yeah, he is good. And I think that with Lamar Jackson, I mean, we even saw it in the playoffs. I mean, I was listening to people watching that game in the playoffs talking about Lamar Jackson, and I was thinking, you don't understand the position, you don't understand the development, and you don't even understand what's happening on the field some of the time to be making the proclamations you are about this player at this point, and so I think that with Jackson, as Jackson grows, the teams, the players along with them are going to have more production. And you have to understand that there was a lot of mollifying with Joe Flacco still in the fold, and there was a learning curve for Jackson. But this year, this will be his offense. You have what you're going to get from Marquise Brown. It's going to be nice to see him used in ways. Again, you're not only going to get to use him as a middle of the field receiver in terms of being able to make quick hitting plays and run, but now you have the threat of Jackson as a runner and the threat of Brown as a runner, and you can do some of that stuff that you had with Tyreek Hill motioning across the formation, but instead of it being Alex Smith or or Patrick Mahomes running, and neither of them are remotely the runners that Lamar Jackson is, suddenly now you have a major problem in terms of having to defend this backfield and defend the run game with the backs that they have, and Mark Ingram, with Kenneth Dixon, Gus Edwards, and then you add on top of it Jackson and Marquise Brown. I mean, there's going to be some dynamic things that they can do that adds, when you add Brown to that equation, that's going to really tie it all together. And so, yeah, Brown could be a nice impact player right away, who also helps lift the rest of this offense.
Cease, you buying or selling Brown in fantasy?
I'm buying, and I can't believe people would be selling. I think that's ignorant. And Matt, when you talk about creativity, I'm thinking, I just want to see like an option sweep. You know what I mean? With Jackson running outside, and then the pitch man's Brown. Like, that would be brilliant. It would be awesome to see. I'm going to try it. Madden. But when you look at it, think about what we've gone through in the last year. In the last year, the first day of the draft, people were like, wait a second, hot take. Lamar Jackson's actually good at passing the ball. Like, okay, didn't recognize that before. And then in the same calendar year, we went to Lamar Jackson can't throw to save his life. Like, those were narratives that were pushed out there by some, and that's ridiculous, because the true story is you add this type of weapon, you add this type of guy that can do so many things just touching the football. And to me, that's an asset that you want. It's a team that's desperate, for that sort of player, and it's good to have it. Can Hollywood exist in Baltimore? Yeah, it can. Like The Wire, right, Bloom? So
yeah, exactly.
I'm buying on it. We regularly fight against the we're kind of rebellious in our takes, not for the sake of being rebellious, but we like to get people to look at things differently. And with Brown, I think there is this herd mentality of like, he's too small. How are you going to do this? Like, I think that's I'll talk about size when it comes in terms of body armor, when it comes to Kyler Murray. I think that's an interesting conversation. But with Marquise Brown, try to catch him, and then we'll talk about size.
Cease, I want to get your take on this because, and Matt, this will be another good one after we hear what Cease has to say about having some time to sleep on it. Because I'm still perplexed on how to project and kill Harry, the Patriot. And I think Mark Schofield brought up a good point, and it probably ended up being persuasive in the end to be positive about him, that the Patriots know what I mean, there's examples in the past where this wasn't true though. But hey, let's assume for a second the Patriots know what he can do. He can do well after the catch. He can win contested balls. He's unfair on back shoulder plays. He's unfair on anything where he has to win the ball in the air. So the Patriots are going to use him that way. But I still think that there's that synchronicity element. There's the option think on your feet element to the wide receiver's job in this offense. And Harry's not going to be good at those things. And then there's this idea that, well, they got a little taste of Josh Gordon and what Josh Gordon can do, and maybe Harry can do some of those things. But Harry doesn't remotely have Josh Gordon's straight line speed. And he's a monotone route runner in terms of speed in his routes. And it's easy for cornerbacks to stick to him. And I don't recall a lot of times where Tom Brady is throwing 50-50 balls to receivers. That's just not his game. So, Cease, I'm still confused of whether to be positive or negative. The strict, hey, the Patriots, good organization, good offense, good quarterback, those initial takes are good. But then when I think about Harry the player, I become hesitant. How about you?
Yeah, and that's one of the most intriguing picks of the first round. It was the final one. We're all waiting for it to happen. And you thought going into this, and it's not like they still couldn't take in Andy Isabella or whatever, but you thought like, okay, that's the speed type of receiver that the Patriots are going to consider. With Harry, what's interesting to note is they've got the old Demaryius Thomas, and then they've got the guy that plays like a young Demaryius Thomas, although not having that speed. We forget that Demaryius used to be pretty damn fast.
4-4.
Yeah. So with that sort of size speed combination, it was incredible what he did in college. Harry's not that, but this is the Patriots. They regularly know how to get the best out of players and to play to their strengths, which you did list for Harry. It's interesting. I'm not as positive on it as I am on Hollywood with the Ravens. But I can't wait to see how it plays out, especially because I don't think Demaryius makes the 53-man roster. So they're going to try to get out of Harry what you could have gotten out of Thomas had he been younger.
Matt, post-draft RSP, folks need to be buying that, so we don't want to spoil anything. But C said Brown over Harry. You've got a lot more thorough work to do in the next week, but frame Harry that way as we're talking about these two first-round receivers.
Well, here's the other thing that we need to remember. I mean, until maybe this year, the Broncos couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when it came to finding a tight end. Now, I'm saying that Cecil's not, but the New England Patriots have also been pretty bad at finding wide receivers in the draft. That's something that's been a weakness of theirs.
Admitted, like Belichick said, we have trouble evaluating. We like them when we can see them play in the pros for a little bit.
And it's their first rounder for Belichick, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, Chad Jackson was like almost a first rounder. Almost. Very close.
Yeah. So they haven't had a lot of success in the past, 7 to 8 years when it comes to drafting wide receivers. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, I look at N'Keal Harry, and it's interesting you think of him as a Demaryius Thomas without a lot of speed. I'm coming from the opposite direction, but probably at the same meeting point as Cecil. To me, he's Marcus Colston with more speed. So it's kind of like whichever tomato, it's still a red fruit, that basically grows on a vine. So, he's that kind of player who it'll be interesting if they look at him and say, maybe he replaces a little bit of what Gronkowski offered us in the middle of the field. And we're using him from that perspective where we can, maybe we're going to use them a little bit more in the middle of the field and then selected shots outside. And because they motion so much, receivers so much around the formation that they can find matchups for him. And maybe they like the intelligence they see out of Harry and his ability to be able to play multiple positions. And they feel like that's going to work out for them better than if they were to just pick one guy who specializes, like a DK Metcalf, and it's kind of boom bust for them. Because when you really look at the Patriots receivers who've been most successful, they've never really been great at one thing. They're really good at several things. And so maybe that's what they recognized in Harry in that respect. And I still think that they're going to draft another receiver or two out of this class who is going to be another worthwhile player, especially with the age and the and the contract status of most of their depth chart.
So, and I think that if we were talking about AJ Brown, Matt, we talked about this last night. AJ Brown fits the Patriots molds so well, so well. But they go with Harry. There was even something out there that they liked AJ Brown. He was the number one receiver on the board. Obviously, he wasn't. I want to really quickly, as we're winding down here, I want to make sure to mention too that there was something really wonderful. It actually brought a tear to my eye to see that the Bills in Bills Mafia, and there's I always love wearing my shirts from 26 Shirts and Del Reed, the Bills fan base, one of the best in the league. Pancho Villa, who I think did get to announce a pick, was it last year? Recently, is in the hospital. And the team actually, you saw the conversation between the war room and him in his hospital bed, and they had him phone in the pick to their representative at the draft, which was Ed Oliver, which is going to be awesome. They're going to love him in Buffalo. Oh my, what a marriage that is. And I just love seeing, guys, we've talked a lot on the show about breaking down barriers and how we're trying to do that, and we appreciate people that do that. And to have a team bring a fan in, a super fan, not just for a ceremonial purpose, but actually bringing him really into the war room. And they had the owner, Terry Pagula, say hi to him, and he said, "I love you." And you could tell the war room was like, wow. And you could tell that Pancho Villa, he really meant it when he said, "I love you." And you could see how much the Bills meant in his life, his whole life, but especially now that he's fighting this fight that he's in the hospital. And it was really touching and a really good moment to remind us what we all bring into each other's lives. And I thought as a Bills, as an organization, showed a great grasp of how they're nothing without the fans. Like we always talk about on the show, we're nothing without the people that are listening. So I loved that. I loved that. I wanted to make sure to point that out before the pages turn and things like that. See, so I want to ask you about, I know he's maybe not quite on the all motorboat team, but I have to love Josh Jacobs playing with a mean streak. You have to love his story. Read it on the Players Tribune, what this guy has been through. He's hungry. We saw him and Hollywood Brown filling up, 8,000 meals for the hungry kids at the draft. I mean, how can you not love this guy, except everyone says, running back in the first round, idiots.
Huh? I was like, I was asked about that last night on there, and I was like, wait a second, what year are we talking about? Like, what were there 3 first-round running backs last year? Top of my head,
yeah,
like Sony Michel, Rashad Penny, Saquon Barkley. Like, okay, Josh Jacobs,
right? A quote-unquote smart organization. Belichick took a running back in the first round.
Right, exactly. So with Jacobs, they'll bring him in to be their new Marshawn Lynch. So it's something like this isn't a top-heavy running back class, as we've noted. There's a lot of great second and third round guys that are kind of clustered into that mix. I can't wait to see where David Montgomery goes. But with Jacobs, I can't wait to see him run for the Raiders. Yes, that means run all over the Broncos, run all over everybody. Go for it. And, I'm interested to see the way this works out for the Raiders. So I don't mind it at all, especially at that spot. Why would they say running back at the first round? Like that's Daniel Jones at 6 is much more of an offense than Josh Jacobs in the 20s.
It's because of the passing game. You cannot underestimate the passing game contributions that he's going to have. Well, we're catching our breath. We're processing everything that happened. Matt, any parting thoughts? And by the way, 60, 70, how many do we have now? 90 people joining us right now. So this is awesome. It's great to spend
middle
time
of the day. I mean, yeah.
Impromptu. And folks, let me tell you, those 90 that are in the chat room now and those that give us feedback, the more positive feedback we get on these kinds of impromptu hangouts, the more you're going to get.
Yeah, and we'll be doing stuff like that on Facebook Live this year as well. So make sure to check us out on Facebook, footballguys.com, because this is the type of stuff that does get response. As someone who just got promoted to digital talent for 104.3 The Fan.
Digital Underground?
Digital Underground, yeah. Like, this is the way things are going. So the more positive feedback we get, the more I was sitting here dozing off watching Futurama. And Bloom texted me. He's like, "Hey, you want to do this?" I was like, "Sure, man. I'll check in. I got to jump on air here in like 5 minutes." But like, this is awesome, and this is kind of the way people consume now.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot more to consume. Thank you, everyone, for giving us this opportunity. So it's just continuing to learn, be surprised in good and bad ways. And again, I want to send out a special thanks again to Paul Perticchese for allowing us, I think the Indiana Jones metaphor was the right one, seeing Dave Gettleman pull his heart out as a Giants fan and say, Cease, I had to make sure to have him on for the Giants pick live, and there's no reaction I can imagine. Oh, Giants fans. Well, maybe it'll all. Yeah. All right. This is great. I know it's exciting. I've got adrenaline from the draft still in my veins from last night. I know all of y'all do, and we're still not done. And then we turn the page to rookie minicamp. And remember, that's when Adam Thielen was discovered. And then we turn the page to OTAs. Then we turn the page to camp. And we turn the page to another wonderful season with you, all of you. It's great to see your face, Cease, and getting to drive. Who's in the driver's seat now? All right, everybody. You're always the classiest. You drive us. You inspire us to be the classiest. So stay classy.